So I was diagnosed, it was June or July of 1999. I was 9 years old. Yeah, we were on a road trip to like northern Canada, and my parents were like, something's wrong with you. So I've been living with type 1 diabetes for just over, I guess it would be like 23 years now. At the time, like my parents were very alternative, so we didn't really ever have to go see a doctor or anything. And then all of a sudden I had type 1 diabetes and I was like in the hospital and I didn't know what was happening, and I just remember it being like scary and confusing all at the same time. During the road trip, because we were in our motorhome, and I was getting up to the bathroom every night and like all the symptoms were there. So as soon as we got home, like 2 weeks later, my parents were like, okay, we're gonna take you to the doctor. And like my blood sugar was so high, I had ketoacidosis, right? Like I was in DKA. So then they just rushed me to the hospital. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. So I used Dexcom, and I started using the Tandem T-Slim insulin pump in, I think it was 2018, but when I got down to Costa Rica in December, it stopped working. So I had to switch back to injections. So usually it's the pump, but it's been injections for like 2 months. I prefer the pump just because it's so much easier, right? Like to manage, but going back to injections can be tough for me just because I find like it takes my body a couple weeks to really like, you know, get back and used to the doses. And then I'm trying to figure out like, okay, like what dose is good? And then I got my period and then I was like, oh my God, I'm high. And I like thought I figured it out, and then I like was super high. And so now I finally think I figured it out again, but I'm like, maybe tomorrow will be different. I think the biggest thing is like just the fluctuations in terms of my mood or energy. Like if I'm high or low, or like even if I have an arrow going one way, like suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted. That like because of diabetes, I am a lot more conscious of like the things that I'm eating and making sure that I'm exercising regularly, and just it causes me to like really be on top of my health on such a huge scale that I don't even know if people living without diabetes are really aware of, right? Like we have to really be aware of so many things. So I think in that sense, like it's forced me to really take care of my body. I am now, but it took me like 18 years. Like for the first 18 years, I just was so like kind of embarrassed about it. Like I just didn't want to talk about it to anyone. Especially like during my teenage years, it was so embarrassing to me that like sometimes I would just not give myself insulin if I was out for dinner with friends, or you know, like if I was on a date, I just like wouldn't bring it up, and then I would ignore my lows, and it was just not a good situation. But I found like it was easier to just ignore that it existed instead of actually talking about it to people. It took me a long time to like even get an insulin pump because I was so appalled by like wearing something on my body that was like diabetes related. I think I just didn't want to be different. Like I didn't want people to look at me, and maybe because I like associated diabetes as something that was like negative in my life, like growing up. And so I thought if I didn't want other people to look at me and to stand out in like a way that I thought was negative when other people probably didn't really care, right? Like, but it was this whole mindset thing. I feel pretty comfortable now, but I guess like if there was an emergency, and like I'm just thinking of this one time at the gym when like I realized I forgot my low snacks, and I was like, oh my God, like I don't even know if I'm gonna make it home. And I was like, oh, like it's a little, I don't know if it's embarrassment or if it's just like, I don't want to be like that person to like be a burden to anyone. Like, but I mean, I would just suck it up. But I feel like the majority of people that I know are all online, which has been really great because I think the whole diabetes community online has really like helped me personally kind of overcome my like shame or embarrassment or anything that I had around diabetes. So I had times when people they would say things like, oh, like you're just overweight because you have diabetes. Or like I remember one time was giving myself an injection in public, and this lady was like so horrified. She grabbed all her kids and like left the room, and it was just like nobody really knew that much about type 1, or I don't know what it was, but I think all those like moments kind of built up, and then eventually I was like, I can't talk about this or like show it, right? Yeah, I think the more people talk about it and educate each other is just brings it to the forefront. Like it's not what some people might think it is, or say that diabetes is like a very individual thing. So what someone else does to manage their diabetes is going to be completely different for someone else. And so I think that's the most important thing, because I don't know if you experience people kind of like telling you things of like, oh, you should do this, or, you know, and it's like, no, that doesn't actually work for me.